Hi everybody, and this is Burke Lyle, and we are just hours away from Game 1 of the World Series, which will start tonight at 8 p.m. It'll be Nationals versus Astros. So before I want to get to anything, there's two things I want to talk about first. So I might start this now on uh, the baseball shows, and I don't know if I'll do this going forward, but I just want to do this opening segment on this day in MLB history, since today is October 22nd. So on this day, notable things happened. So in 1975, the A's, 1972, the A's beat the Reds in the World Series 3-2 in Game 7. That was kind of the pre-Big Red Machine. The Reds were definitely the team of the 70s in my mind, and that was right. And that was the first of three World Series that the A's won. The only team to ever three-peat besides the New York Yankees. So then we go into 1975. The Reds beat the Red Sox 4-3 in Game 7 to win the World Series. It was funny. I looked up the date yesterday. It was Carlton Fisk who hit a walk-off the day before, hit a walk-off home run to win the World Series, or to force a Game 7. The Reds beat the Red Sox, and again, that was kind of in the middle of the curse of the Bambino. And then this day in 2000, Yankees win Game 2 of the 2000 World Series. That was known as the Subway Series, and the Yankees met to play in the regular season. The two New York teams at the time was Old Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, and Citi Field, then it was Shea Stadium in Queens. I know how to get to both stadiums. It's easy. If you study New York City subway station, hop on the 4 train, go to Grand Central, transfer over to 7, and you're at now Yankee Stadium, new Yankee Stadium, and now Citi Field. So that was the Subway Series then. The Yankees ended up winning that series 4-1. As they won their third World Series in a row in 4 and 5 years, and they've only won one since, and will not win this year. On this day in 2003, Alex Gonzalez hits a walk-off home run against the Yankees in Game 4 of the World Series. So I can't believe that was 16 years ago today. That is very hard to believe. But that was the year the Marlins beat the Yankees in the World Series, as they won their second World Series. That year, Josh Beckett ended up pitching a shutout in Game 6, and the Marlins, believe it or not, have not played in a playoff game since then. While the Yankees, I actually counted that, a few days ago. I forgot it, but it's astonishing. And on this day in 2011, so 8 years later, believe it or not, halfway between that day and today, Albert Pujols hits 3 home runs in Game 3 and a 16-7 win against the Rangers. So that was, believe it or not, those are Albert Pujols' final days as a Cardinal. So he hitting 3 home runs in a World Series game, that is rare company. I think the only 4 players to ever do that are Babe Ruth, Reggie Jackson, Pujols, and then I think the next year Pablo Sandoval did it. So that was against the Rangers. And on this day 3 years ago in MLB history, the Cubs beat the Dodgers 5-0 to win their first National League pennant since 1945. So when you look at moments like that, it's kind of interesting to see kind of what happened on this day in history. Obviously today, being October 22nd, will be Game 1 of the World Series, so you never know how historic this Game 1 was. Last year's Game 1, I don't think anything particularly exciting happened. I know 2 years ago in Game 1, it was Clayton Kershaw. He struck out 12 Houston Astros and gave the Dodgers a 1-0 lead. That's what we saw, really, the greatness of Kershaw, and that's what happened in Game 1 of the World Series. And I think Game 1, and this will be interesting on this day. This Sunday will be the 4-year anniversary of it. It was the Mets and Royals. I think they ended up going to like 15 innings, 14 innings. I think Alex Gordon was a tying home run in the 9th inning, and I think later sac fly to beat the Mets in Game 1. That was a historic Game 1, and then so you could go on certain game 1s of the World Series, but here we are tonight. So now I just went before. I'm not going to go really deep dive into it like I did for some of those games. I just want to talk a few minutes about Game 6 and what that home run meant. So in Game 6, Jose Altuve had a walk-off home run. So what that meant, that home run, if you think about it, there's been a number of home runs in Astros history. Just less than a week earlier, Carlos Correa had a walk-off home run in Game 2, right? So that walk-off home run will probably be fairly well known. If you're an Astros fan, you'll definitely remember it. I think all always remember that Carlos Correa walk-off home run. But that's kind of a footnote. That's not even going to be the most famous walk-off home run of that series. There's not many postseason series where there's multiple walk-off home runs in a series. I should have looked it up. Multiple walk-off home runs in a series. That would have been fascinating. But I didn't look it up. But anyways, that won't even be the most famous walk-off home run in that series. So really what that is, that walk-off home run signifies that Altuve, it sent the Astros to the World Series. So that whole run, it will not be as famous as Aaron Boone's home run, I don't think, since obviously that Boone home run was in a Game 7, and it was a come-by and win. If the Yankees didn't rally, they would have lost the series, while in this, there would have been a Game 7, and the Astros never trailed. In fact, they actually were up 3-0 after Gurriel had a home run, and they're up 4-2 with 1 out in the 9th before LeMahieu, who was just could have ground into a double play, and that would have been hit a tying home run there. But that walk-off home run, I think, will be very well known. Obviously, probably the most famous moment in Astros history might be, besides them winning the World Series, and besides obviously that Bregman walk-off in Game 5 against the Dodgers. So that I would rank that fairly high up there on the list of famous home runs, certainly in recent memory, certainly in Astros history. That will be well known. But just the significance of it. Jose Altuve throughout his career, when he came up, he was not really known as a power hitter. Went on to 31 home runs this year. I think he's hit 5 home runs this playoff series. And when he hit that home run, that he was series MVP. He had a great series. He's played really well this October. Definitely been the Astros' best position player from throughout October for sure. Just a signature moment. And for the Yankees, what this meant, factoid about them, which I knew this, since the Yankees, if you look at each decade, they won World Series in the 1920s, the 30s. They won one in the 40s, many World Series in the 40s, and in the 1950s they did as well. Same in the 60s, won a few in the 70s. In the 1980s, they weren't very successful into one World Series, 1981. Obviously, the late 90s, they're very successful. Early 2000s, went to a bunch of World Series. And then went to the World Series in 2009 to close out the 2000 decade. But something remarkable now is in the 2010s decade. And the Yankees were one of the most successful franchises in baseball. Don't get me wrong. They won 100 games twice to close out the decade, 18-19. They opened the decade by going to the LCS. They went in 12. They went 2 out of the last 3 years to end the decade. So they sit then 4 times throughout the decade. And sure, they went kind of in the middle of the decade. They had some struggles. They missed the playoffs 3 times in 4 years. But overall, they're a very successful franchise. And if this is a bad decade for them, they had an opportunity. Things should have gone their way. They could have gone to 4 World Series this decade. I mean, they were just... And in terms of that, in that series against Texas, they weren't that close. I think they won. They were lucky to win Game 1. They're down 3-1. And Game 6 wasn't close. They got swept by the Tigers 2 years ago in Houston. I'll never forget that Game 4 in the Bronx. That was so much fun. That was a great series. That was an historic series. So much happened in that series, from the Correa walk-off / Verlander complete 13 strikeout complete game in that Game 2. That Game 4, 8th inning, to the Yankees being up 3-2, so everybody winning at home. That was a great series. The Yankees were close to winning that series. In the past series, how close were they to winning that series again? Last week, I think as recently as last Friday, we just kept talking at length about this series, basically. Or it was on Saturday when I recorded. We talked about the series all the time. What happened? Well, the Yankees just didn't hit enough of runners in scoring position. That's what happened. And they're down 3-1. Yet, they could have done more. That was a winnable series for the Yankees. That was a winnable series for the Yankees. That is a series that they definitely could have won. Should they have won? I don't know if they should have won. They never blew any saves. Sure, if you want to say. But then again, in a game that they tied it up, it was tied in the 9th inning or later. They lost in Game 2, a game they could have had. I think they even had a lead in that game. And losing Game 6. Not to mention, I think they're up 1-0 in games 3 and 4, and had many opportunities to really break it open, and they really didn't do what they were supposed to do really until game 5. And they had to go off the opener, bullpen. Astros kind of did a bullpen game too, and basically their experiment went wrong when Gurriel that threw in a home run, so they're out of game 6. And you bring in Chapman, gives up the home run to Altuve. And that's it. So for the Yankees, they're obviously a very successful franchise. I think they'll be good for a long time. They have young talent. And I think their biggest weakness, they need to work on starting pitching. And that was a weakness all summer. I mean, throughout July, they're saying, oh, their starting rotation is awful. I mean, I think it was one of the worst ERAs in the American League between, especially in July. I think between, say, right after the All-Star game until the trade deadline, then no starting pitching. It was a weakness for them, and we saw how Aaron Boone managed throughout the playoffs. You think about this. Think about how the Astros operate with starting pitching. Think about how the Nationals operate with starting pitching. Even to the Cardinals to an extent. Right? The Yankees had nothing close to that. Nothing close to that. At all. The best game by a starting pitcher in the entire playoffs was started by James Paxton. He probably their two best playoff starts for them. The starter went 6 innings just twice. And it caught up to them in the end. They didn't have a starting rotation. So what this means is starting pitching is so important that I think that's why the Nationals and Astros are in the World Series. And I'm a huge advocate of starting pitching. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it is very important. I'm not a big fan of bullpens. I think, sure, they are important to be good, but I feel like you can't overuse bullpens. Like what the Yankees did, where they were too bullpen dependent, or what the Rays or Brewers are. I mean, think about it. Teams that were the most starting dependent. Nationals, Astros, World Series bound. Think about the teams that were most bullpen dependent in the playoffs. Brewers lost in the wild card game, and who I don't think they would have beaten the Dodgers if they would have won that wild card game. The Dodgers would have beaten them for sure. The Nationals were just so much better than the Brewers. I mean, sure, it was just one game, but just looking back, it wasn't. The talent level really wasn't that close between the two teams. Think about the Rays, Astros, very bullpen dependent. They took the Astros to 5, but in the end, it was the Astros series, right? So, Cardinals, I think they had better starting pitching than the Braves, slightly better. They won. So, again, starting pitching carried out. And we've had, so talking about starting pitching matchup series, this Nationals-Astros series is obviously probably the best series you could get between the AL and the NL for starting pitching. Since you think of on the AL side, the Astros had by far the best starting pitching. No question. I think the Nationals did, since the only difference was, sure, the Dodgers had Buehler, Kershaw, Ryu, but they had Anibal Sanchez. And then the Braves side, and then the Cardinals-Braves series, sure, that was a pretty good series for starting pitching, not great. Which is the reason why the Nationals beat this game, is I thought, game 1 against the Cardinals, I think that was the only game where you thought, maybe the Cardinals somehow have possibly a better starting pitcher. And it was fairly close, but it was Sanchez's game in the end. And then Scherzer, Wainwright, no contest. Strasburg, Flaherty. I think that was the potential for the Astros to make it close, or for the Cardinals to make things interesting. I thought games 1 and 3 were their best shots, and then Corbin, Hudson really not that close. I mean, Hudson had nothing, was over really before it was really over by the first inning, so it was that type of game. So in terms of starting pitching, we got probably the best you could get from either side. The Astros, no contest, by far the best in the American League. And now, the one difference is, I'd say, is the Nationals have the best starting pitching is, and we'll get to that, is the difference between 4 starters. So let's preview the series. So obviously the Yankees were done. They're at a very successful year. It'll be interesting to see what their offseason is like. I think, again, as I said, I think that the biggest thing they need to address is starting pitching. Obviously, I think they'll have a great lineup next year. Bullpen, we feel like, is going to be a strength for them next year. I feel like they'll win close to 100 games next year. And they'll be a World Series contender next year. It'll just be interesting to see how they spend their money in the offseason. Do they potentially go after Garrett Cole, for that matter. So, World Series preview now. Oh, now let's talk about what this means. So, for the Nationals and Astros, and here's one thing about this World Series that I think proves that works. Trying to lose in baseball, I could use the word tanking. It works in baseball. Since this is how both of these teams built these World Series foundations. The Astros, and I just read a whole book on it recently. Is the same writing as Ben Reiter, or whatever his name is, Ritter or something. I don't know. Who wrote something like that. Who had that famous Sports Illustrated cover about the Astros, and then of course wrote a whole book on how the Astros process. It worked. That process worked tremendously. It's now they've won 100 games 3 years in a row, and they're one of the greatest teams they've ever seen. So their process worked. So did the Cubs process. And the Nationals process, well, again, it could have worked a lot quicker than it really did. I mean, they could have won the World Series in 2012. I think they're definitely that talented. They could have won in 14 or 16, 17. They could have won the World Series as recently as 5 to 7 years ago. But just the way it was, their playoff success, so maybe some luck, but really more your performance in playoff games for the Nationals. I mean, think about it. They lost 100 games in 2008 and 2009. In comes Harper and Strasburg, and by 2012, both of them are huge reasons why the Nationals win 97 games. So the process worked out fairly quickly for them. They won 98 games in 2012, and they had success thereafter then. 14, 15 was a down year, obviously 16, 17, and then 19. So they had some very successful seasons. Yet this year they finally broke through and went to the World Series. So to address, does losing in baseball work? Yes, I think it does. Down the road, maybe towards the end of this decade, or even in the middle of this decade, next decade, maybe even potentially the early years. Maybe you see a Tigers Marlins World Series or Orioles, Padres World Series. I don't know, but just an example of that. I think teams they see bad now, I think will be World Series contenders in a few years. I just think that's the way it's going to be. It's a cycle, so tanking works in baseball. So to address that starting pitching, we know it's going to be tonight. It's going to be Cole versus Scherzer. Garrett Cole pitched last Tuesday, so he's on 6 days rest. He has plenty of time to get ready for the series. So Garrett Cole this October, and against the Yankees, you look beatable. Like you had a chance. But the Yankees, as I said, I went on and on about this last week. They didn't take advantage of the base runners were given. I think he had 6 walks in that game. 22.2 innings pitched, 32 strikeouts, 0.40 ERA in the playoffs, facing Scherzer, who started in the wild card game. Wasn't at his best, but kept them in the game. Just home runs. That's the reason why the Nationals almost lost that game, was home runs. And then was the setup man in game 2, pitched against the Dodgers, struck out the side that game. I think struck out 10 against the Dodgers in a do or die in a game that they had to win in game 4. And then 11 strikeouts, 7 innings, almost had a no-hitter going against the Cardinals. So Scherzer, for the most part, has been great this playoffs. Huge reason why they're in the World Series. So he's facing against Garrett Cole. This might be one of those pitcher's duels. I'm not saying each pitcher is going to go 9, but what I am saying is it could be, each pitcher goes 7, maybe 8 innings. Each gets double-digit strikeouts. Somebody wins 1-0. This game could go either way. Maybe somebody hits a home run. Or, somebody happens to hit a double, and then there's maybe a couple ground outs or whatever. Or a sac fly and a ground out there. Something like that. It might be one of those fast-paced but very low-scoring games. Game 2 is Verlander. Was dominant against the Rays in his first start. Game 1 of the LDS. Came back on short rest, really didn't have anything. Pitched pretty well against the Yankees in Game 2, and then, obviously, so and Scherzer, by the way, will be on 9 days rest, pitched last Saturday against the Cardinals, so 10 days ago. So Verlander will be on 4 days rest, regular rest. He pitched in Game 5, gave up that home run, had one bad inning. Most part was really good. Again, it was the home run ball. That's what caused the problem. So again, if Verlander can carry over innings 2 through 7, That would be great for the Astros, and I think he will. And then Strasburg came out of the bullpen, basically saved their season. Pitched 3 innings, came back 3 days later, down 1-0. Pitched really well in that game. I think he struck out 10 or something in 6 innings, and then came back on short rest or regular rest in Game 5. Pitched fairly well that game. Certainly gave them every opportunity they had to win, which they did. Time goes by fast. That was 13 days ago. And then came in and pitched game 3. So it was on and struck out 12. Had one of the best starts of his playoff career. Was just so dominant. That start against the Cardinals had everything working right for him. Strasburg right now will be on so 8 days rest. 8 days rest. All right. And then Greinke, game 3, it will be Greinke. That's what the Astros have announced. So it will be on Friday night. Greinke will be pitching. Let's see, he pitched on Thursday. So he'll be on 7 days rest. Greinke's had a rough playoffs for the most part. He has had a rough playoff. Got hit very hard by the Rays in that game 3. And then gave a home run, pitched okay against I'd say against them in game 1, but then game 4, almost took them out of the game. Almost got it. He settled down, but he didn't have any control that game. Was on the verge of the Yankees doing what they did against Verlander that game. And they're in danger of the series being tied 2-2. So Greinke's not had a very good playoffs. You can see his ERA in the playoffs is 6.43. Sure, I guess he's made progress since the Rays start, but again, back in Washington. And for the Nationals, we don't know whether it will be Corbin or Sanchez. Since Corbin, if he did pitch, he would be on 10 days rest or 9 days rest. And then game 4, again, that's where the Nationals have the big advantage. That's why I say their starting pitcher is better, at least on paper. Since the Nationals throughout the playoffs showed they had a 1-2-3-4. Obviously, in the games they won against St. Louis, talk about what Sanchez did, 7 2/3, no-hit innings until he finally gave up a hit, and then struck out 9 against the Dodgers. So we know Sanchez is a very reliable 4-starter. Obviously, we know what Scherzer and Strasburg did against St. Louis and against the Dodgers, right? And then Corbin, who came out and had 12 strikeouts, right? So that's a great rotation. So, again, but the Astros rotation, 1, 2, 3, is right up there. So Scherzer, Cole. This year, Cole was better. He was healthier, obviously. So Cole, overall, I don't know. Could be a tie. Verlander, Strasburg. Verlander, overall, I'd say is better. Higher strikeout rate. Maybe he's more efficient, lower ERA, things like that. If I don't look at basic numbers, maybe his walk rate's lower, I don't know. But for Strasburg, again, very dominant, great postseason starter. Again, slight advantage to the Astros there. But still, that's just how great they are. You have Verlander and Cole, who basically, if you move one of them in the National League, A, one of them would win the National League Cy Young, and B, the other one would win the American League Cy Young. But they're on the same team, and they're on the same team, so only one of them can win the Cy Young, and the same league for that matter. Greinke, Corbin, I give the advantage to Corbin. Sure, he struggled against the Dodgers. Some experiments didn't work out, but now you have him pitching tonight. I give it to Corbin. Jose Urquidy, he pitched fairly well against the Yankees, I guess. So it'll be kind of him and and then the bullpen, for that matter. In Game 4, it's going to be certainly more bullpen dependent at that point in time. So looking at now having Sanchez, I give the advantage to the Nationals. Right then and there, advantage Nationals. So after looking at that starting pitching, slight advantage to the Nationals, just due since I think they have the biggest advantage by far in Game 4 right now. So the Nationals this is a series of starting pitching, if you like that. So what happened? So kind of going into that. So again, the Nationals don't know whether it's going to be Corbin or Sanchez first. If Sanchez starting Game 4, believe it or not, he'd be on 14 days rest you start game 3, it'd be 13 days rest. So either way, Sanchez would have a lot of rest just due to the circumstances of what's been going on. So that would be interesting to see who they start. I wonder if you potentially think about using a starting pitching. Again, the Nationals did that. Strasburg against Milwaukee. Scherzer was a setup man in game 2. Corbin came out of the bullpen twice. In game 3 and 5, he came out twice. So, and Corbin got 1 out in game 2. So you wonder if potentially you think about using a starting pitcher again, for that matter. And if you do, how? And if you do you have Corbin, since the Red Sox were so well known for doing it last year? I know Rick Porcello. Hi everybody, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had a slight interruption. So anyways, where were we? Hey everybody, welcome back. Sorry, I'm in the middle of video making process and someone was trying to call me, so I basically told them I can't talk right now. So I'm sorry about that. So where was I? You know, I'm trying to remember where I was. What was I talking about? Oh, bullpen usage among starters. So yes, the Red Sox, they're well known for that last year. Obviously, Chris Sale closing out the World Series, and Nathan Eovaldi basically coming out of the bullpen. I think he did it against Houston multiple times. He did it against the Red Sox, and obviously basically gave up a start to come out against the in that 18-inning game. So the Red Sox use that. So the Nationals, is Corbin maybe made a setup man push back to game 4? Maybe I don't know. Maybe give him give him some work. Obviously, he hasn't pitched in a week. Maybe you do that. So we want to talk about certain things. The Astros road to get there, so they beat Tampa. Obviously, you know, they won game 1 and 2 very soundly. Obviously, Verlander and Cole were dominant to start out, and they ran into some trouble. Obviously, starting Greinke and Verlander on short rest. The Rays' offense came alive, was in Tampa, and then Cole basically put that to rest. Basically, in game 5, the offense came out. So that's what happened there. Against New York, again, they won game 1. They lost game 1, 7-0. The Yankees dominated game 1. Game 2, it really... You know what? It took a Correa walk-off home run to make sure they weren't down 0-2. They were fairly close to being down 0-2. And games 3 and 4 were close games in New York until they managed to pull away. You know, the Yankees gave the Yankees opportunities, and the Yankees didn't take advantage of them. So against the Yankees, obviously they outpitched them in terms of starting pitching, and in that series, basically they hit timely home runs. And they won the series in 6. Obviously, that Altuve home run. So the Nationals road, Milwaukee. You know, they almost weren't supposed to be here. You know, their road to the World Series was very almost ended against the Brewers. It took really until that inning. I mean, I think with 2 outs in that inning, Ryan Zimmerman hit a very weak single that fell in no man's land. And then a Rendon walk, and then Soto. That Soto hit, obviously. So their season almost ended against the Brewers. And when they beat the Brewers, I started to think, you know, things are maybe different. Right then and there. Because they won a playoff series for the first time. How about that? And against the Dodgers, they lost game 1. They needed Strasburg in game 2 to come back and win. Just good bullpen work by Doolittle, Scherzer, and Hudson. And then after that game 3 loss, the Dodgers just looked like, okay, they're the better team. But they thought, okay, they have Scherzer and Strasburg. Maybe they can somehow do it. And they did. The defining moment of game 4 was Scherzer, and obviously that Zimmerman home run. In game 5, they're down 3-0. And then in the 8th inning, I think they're 6 outs away from elimination. Rendon, Soto hit those back-to-back home runs. So they win, and then the Howie Kendrick grand slam. So they beat the Dodgers, and then really you think this team's different. And the reasons why are, obviously they won game 4, but the reason why things were different is they actually came back. They were losing a game that maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe there's a game maybe they shouldn't have won. Maybe they should have lost that game. And they hit those home runs. They go to extra innings. and they take advantage of it. Oh yeah, if Will Smith hits the ball 5 feet further, their season's over too. So they had a break there. Cardinals, lights out starting pitching, timely hitting. I mean, Michael A. Taylor hitting a home run in Game 2. I think Howie Kendrick and Yan Gomes drove in the only runs in Game 1. Howie Kendrick taking over in Game 3, and Ryan Zimmerman. And then Game 4 just coming out in the first inning, 7 runs, putting it away. Corbin was really good for the most part. He sure had one kind of rough inning. There's a few scares here and there, but they swept that series. So who had the easier series? So they cruised through there. So Game 5, both teams had to get through Game 5 against teams. The Astros were against the underdog Rays team, while the Nationals upset a Dodgers team. The Nationals really basically pitching dominated the NLCS. So who had the easier road? Both teams. The Nationals were much closer to losing Game 5 than the Astros were losing to the Rays. On the other hand, in the LCS, the Nationals cruised through. They had an easier series. I mean, the Astros really had to work to win games 2, 3, and 4 against the Yankees, and then really they had to work hard to win Game 6. It wasn't over until Altuve hit the walk-off home run. So the Nationals, I guess their road was easier, so the Nationals are better rested. Of course, you talk about rest going into a series. I mean, the recent teams to sweep in LCS is, I think, the Mets did it against the Cubs. The Royals, I think, took the Blue Jays to 6. So the Mets had more rest, and you know what happened? The Royals won in 5. I remember the Giants swept the Yankees, the Tigers swept the Yankees in 2012, while the Giants, I remember they took the Cardinals to a 7th game. They're down 3-1, so they had to work really hard to come back. I think they had 1 day of rest in between. So it was basically there, right? And you know what they did? They won that series in 4. I think the most famous example was the Cardinals. I think they took and then you go back to 2007, the Rockies, Red Hot Rockies, they couldn't lose a game. And while the Red Sox had to work really hard to come back against the Indians in the ALCS. And you know what it was? The Red Sox won in 4. Or the Cardinals working really hard against the Mets to win in 7. They had to work really hard that series. I mean, I didn't watch that game live. I was just a kid then. I kind of know that Game 7 of 06. Right? Well, the Tigers, they swept. Maggie Ordonez's home run to win the pennant, right? They looked flat in that series. They played awful that series, right? They didn't know what they were doing out there. So, in recent evidence, the team that I think has to work hard to win a series and has less rest against a team that just swept the series and doesn't quite know what to do for that week. You know what happens? I feel like that team wins. So that will be an interesting question. Rest advantage. Since the Astros, based on recent trends, have the advantage right there. So how they won, I think the biggest strength of the Nationals was starting pitching. I mean, we talked about it. How well Scherzer and Strasburg pitched against the Dodgers. They won every game they started. They won that game in the series. They pitched 8 innings of that wild card game together. They basically shared that game. Strasburg saved their season. How about, again, we talked about this all playoff series against the Cardinals. Think about how well Sanchez, and then Scherzer 11 strikeouts, Strasburg 12 strikeouts in 7 innings. It was them. It was all starting pitching. And how great Corbin was for most of that Game 5. Sure, he had to work hard for 5 innings, but he was just so dominant when he was on. So those factors, right? Nationals is starting pitching, obviously clutch hits. Think about Soto with his clutch hit against the Brewers. And then you go on to Game 5, Soto, Rendon, Kendrick, clutch hitting. If they don't get those clutch hits, they lose to the Brewers and certainly lose to the Dodgers. I mean, their season was could have ended very well 3 weeks ago, and maybe we're talking about a different World Series right now. We're not talking about the Nationals. and I wouldn't be wearing my Nationals hat and sunglasses for most shows for the last 3 weeks either. So now, on the other hand, where was I going? The Nationals, I think timely hits, sure, against the Cardinals. They got those. Oh, Yan Gomes picked them up, or Michael A. Taylor in Game 2 with the home run. Hits like that. And then obviously coming back to Washington, offense exploded for the first time in that series. So the Cardinals were in St. Louis. The Nationals just got slightly more hits, had more base runners. So it was their advantage there. For the Astros, you know what it was? It was starting pitching. Verlander and Cole obviously started 4 out of the 5 games against the Rays. They won 3 of them. Garrett Cole was dominant at 15 strikeouts against the Rays. And I think it was timely home runs throughout the series in Game 1 and Game 2. And obviously hitting home runs in Game 5. They won. Game 2 against the Yankees, how about Springer and Correa's? I think those were the 2 home runs they needed to win the game, obviously. And then I think Game 4, obviously, when Springer and Correa each hit 3 home runs, those were timely home runs that basically changed the series and basically put the Astros really in the driver's seat in that series and basically made it very hard for the Yankees to win that series. But they very nearly forced a Game 7. And then, obviously, the storyline Game 6, that Gurriel home run, 3-0, turned out to be turned out they really needed that, since it ended up being 4-4. Altuve hits the home run. So there you go. 5 out of 6 runs in that game comes from home runs. So for the Astros, home runs and starting pitching, I think, have been the biggest thing. Offense, they do need offense, yes. So that's kind of how they won their game. So talking about advantages, who has the better offense? I'm going to say Astros for the most part. Since if you compare Bregman to Rendon, I think it's very close. Maybe slight edge to Bregman offensively, maybe a very slight. They're both very talented, great offensive players. And then you think about and for the Nationals, sure, they have a very good offense. But you think about in the regular season who they had, sure, Turner, Eaton, that's good. That's definitely solid for sure. I'd take that. A lot of teams like to have that combination. Base stealer and someone who gets on base. Then Rendon, Soto, obviously very good, very good. But then it kind of drops off. And yes, you have Howie Kendrick, who when he's in the lineup is very good. Hit 344 this year and won the LCS MVP in the National League side. But then, I guess there's some drop-off, like Ryan Zimmerman. Sure, he's had some big moments in the playoffs, for sure. And in the regular season, but for the most part, is not going to match up. And then it's a drop-off. Right? Brian Dozier could very well be starting. So there's an offensive drop-off right there. And then you have so you have that to look into, and then Gomes Suzuki, right? So the Nationals lineup, it's good, very good, can score a lot of runs, it's certainly capable of that, but it's not the reason why the Astros have the bigger advantage. Think about it, never stops. Springer, I think it's Springer, who bats second for that? Oh, come on, I can't believe I'm blanking on this. Oh, cool, of course, Springer, Altuve, Brantley, Bregman, Alvarez, Gurriel, Correa, 1 through 7 right there. It doesn't stop. It could go on forever, right? I mean, Yordan Alvarez batted 7th at times, and sure, he's had a very rough playoff series. You know, he has this whole World Series to redeem himself, but that's why the Astros have the lineup. It just goes on forever. I mean, think about it. Michael Brantley hits 320 in the regular season. Very hard to strike out. Bregman's MVP candidate. Alvarez, think about what he could do in a full year. He's going to win the Rookie of the Year unanimously. Correa in a half a season if he's healthy, right? So that Astros lineup just doesn't stop. It is one of the best lineups that I can remember. In terms of starting pitching, Nationals, the reason why I talked about that earlier, they have a better 4-starter. And they're probably, but again, you could debate it. Again, I think Cole and Verlander are an advantage over Strasburg and Scherzer, obviously, but they're probably the only team that has that advantage. I take Corbin over Greinke, or Sanchez over Greinke, or vice versa. So the Nationals there, since I think they have a certain 4-starter, well, the Astros might not. It's hard to say. Bullpen, definitely the Astros. And the Nationals, their bullpen. I mean, think about how they beat the Dodgers. It was basically starter, Doolittle, Hudson, or maybe, you had Max Scherzer and Corbin coming out of the bullpen multiple times. Against St. Louis, it was Sanchez and Doolittle, right? And then against the Cardinals, it's basically Scherzer, the Doolittle combination, and Hudson. I think Corbin actually got one out as a specialist, and then Strasburg. And the only time they had other pieces, say a Tanner Rainey, who pitched, who the only time they really needed the rest of the bullpen, Tanner Rainey came up clutch there, but then you needed, I think, Doolittle to get 5 outs and Hudson to get 4 outs, right? So Hudson and Doolittle, they usually ask to get more than 3 outs, right? And the only time in a game that was even close that they even trusted the bullpen to get outs was Tanner Rainey. I think he pitched against the Dodgers. I think he got a few outs against them in Game 5. But for the most part, you may not see But for the most part, if the game is close, you're not going to see anyone else besides. They're basically so dependent on starter Doolittle Hudson. That's basically it. The rest of the rotation, I don't know how it factors out. I really don't. That would be interesting. Rest of the bullpen. So the Nationals, they try to avoid most of their bullpen. And do they have to trust some other guys in the bullpen? I mean, that would be interesting to see. So again, that was their huge weakness. In fact, their bullpen ERA was the worst ever for any team to ever make it to the playoffs. Now, of course, the World Series, LCS, vice versa, right? So the Astros, they have the better bullpen for sure. So how I say the series is going to be out. So Astros think they're the better offense. Maybe they score more runs than the Nationals since, again, they should have their lineup basically goes almost nonstop, 1 through 9. Heck, Robinson Chirinos is a power hitting catcher, right? Offense of the Astros, starting pitching the Nationals. So again, so to say, I think the Nationals win one of the games, 1 or game 2. I feel like that has to be 1-1. I doubt anybody goes up 2-0 unless A, one of their pitchers just doesn't have it, and B, they're both Chris Bond dominant and the other team has no offense whatsoever. Right, game 3 or 4, I think the Nationals win one of those games. Right, maybe they get to Greinke. So it's going to be a good series. And when I saw the pickings, right, I saw most people pick the Astros. In fact, at the beginning of the playoffs, I said the Astros would win the World Series. Almost everybody did. They had by far the most popular pick to win the World Series. And this year, ESPN, MLB.com, most people are saying the Astros, right? I think it's going to be a good series. I think the Nationals are going to be in it the entire time. But at the end of the day, maybe you go back to Cole and Verlander and they just... So again, at the end of the day, I'm going to say Astros win in a very close 6 game. They may win in 7, I don't know. But I feel like at the end of the day, it's going to be the Astros. They're just more talented overall. In fact, they're heavy, heavy favorites to win the series. So the Nationals are going to have a good underdog fight. And, right here, look, I had yesterday to talk about the Nationals for 30 minutes. I had that video where I got to talk about them in the World Series. All right? Obviously, I want the Nationals to win the World Series. If they don't, it'll be kind of disappointing. But regardless, I said this yesterday, if they don't win the World Series, I'm going to be proud of this team. I'm not being biased in this episode. I'm trying to look at it from kind of a neutral point of view. The Astros are just a better team. That's just the way it is. So Astros in 6. The Astros will be 2019 World Series champions. And that will be their second World Series in 2 years. They beat the Dodgers in 2017. So the Astros are the 2019 World Series champions. Thank you for listening. I think our next episode, we may come on the air on Thursday to talk about kind of middle of the series after games 1 and 2. Before we then go on to, and then maybe we'll do a post-series podcast. I don't know what we'll do from there. We don't know. But it's been fun talking talking baseball throughout the playoffs. Thank you.